Hello, Daniel. Can you unmute yourself?
I did. Just to acknowledge that yesterday we had people from 20 different countries from the IFIP. So we had people from Jordan, Iran, not Iran, Ethiopia and Holland and various countries. And I think one of the beauties of the IFIP is that nowadays, because of this Zoom thing that we're doing, we can really go beyond our sort of regional corner and really embrace what's going on all over the world and learn from each other. And I know that I myself and the other IFIP representatives here learned an awful lot from colleagues from the Caribbean. And it's actually something which I started off by saying is that the thing about inclusion is that every school is different, every region is different. And there is this identity called the Caribbean, but actually when we're dealing with inclusion, we're dealing with individuals. And somehow being involved on a global scale helps me understand what it means to be an individual. You know, I just have my own sort of little perspective sort of thing. And as a good example of this, as I'm doing my little ramble at the beginning, Helena, I've had the honor and pleasure of speaking with you in public quite a few times in lots of different international forums. And every time I do, I learn a huge amount. And so it's so lovely to see you again. Even though you're in Sweden, I'm in England, I feel like we've done quite a bit of work together, but we've never met. And now we're speaking at a conference in the Caribbean. I mean, it's just amazing.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. I just said to my husband, okay, I have to go in here because I have to go to a conference in the Caribbean. And he's like, what? And I think this is the great thing. If there are any positives from the 2 years that the whole world has experienced, the 2 past years with the pandemic, it's that we can really come together and we can do what the speaker, the motivational speaker was saying. You use the cutlery that you have, the silverware you have, and if you're given, sort of like if you're given lemons, make lemonade. And I think it's great. And inclusion, what we're talking about today, is about learning. The first time we met, I think, I said to you, Daniel, that I think inclusion is a verb, and you reacted to that. And you actually wrote something about it. What do you think I meant by inclusion as a verb?
Yeah, what came up for me, and I should possibly just a bit of a context for anyone who's listening. Some talks are very, what's the word, didactic, I suppose, very tailored to delivering information. And what Helena and I tend to do is to chat, and out of it comes ideas and knowledge. And we would welcome anyone else to sort of chip in as well. So please do put your hand up or turn your mic on. And we're talking about, and the reason why we're doing that is because we're talking about an issue to do with inclusion, an aspect of sort of foundational issue to do with inclusion, which is belonging. And so this is the link, I think, just getting back to your question, Helena. The idea of the verb meant that it's an activity that's ongoing rather than a point of arrival. And that made me really think that it's, because very often I think school starting point is this sort of, they want to either be inclusive because they feel they're not being inclusive. So there's this idea that they are now, congratulations, you've arrived, you are now inclusive. And this idea that you were saying is that actually there's no such thing as that. It's an ongoing process and activity. And I thought that was a really powerful way of putting that.
Because we never know what the obstacles or the barriers may be. The barriers that we see today will open our eyes and make us identify even other barriers tomorrow. So we can't just sit down and be content I think that's really what I was saying, that inclusion is not about what you said, arriving at a point where we can, sit back and be content. Wow, we have all these structures in place. Wow, we're doing everything right. Because we'll see more every day.
Yeah, I must say, actually, the process of writing articles and books, and I know that you've written quite a lot of books, and the PhD that I wrote with the help of Vivian. Thank you very much, Vivian, who's here. The more I realize that we are so very much at the beginning of the journey of inclusion.
Yeah.
It's really in the history of humankind. It's a recent phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so it feels to me like we're all sort of like innovating in the space. It's exciting in that regard. It's like we recently discovered how electricity, and now everyone's going off and sort of making items that we can sort of power with electricity. How cool is that? And so it's a little bit like that. It feels like we're in very much new territory still.
And that's why you first and I have opened my eyes to the concept of belonging as a really, really important aspect of creating inclusive schools and inclusion. And I think that when we talk about belonging, let me tell you what happened when I was at a few schools, because I've been working hard in August, because in Sweden schools start in August. So the teachers regularly come back at the beginning of August, and then the students are coming maybe last week or this week. Anyway, I was talking about belonging with one school, and they said that yes, belonging is a really important aspect of this. And they were all, fired up by this. Yes, we need to talk more about belonging, because if a student doesn't belong in class, then it's better for them to be in a separate classroom where they might feel more at ease with others who are like them, where they belong.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
I understand. I mean, I think this is actually one of the symptoms of the sort of the concept of, that we're still very much at the beginning, because there's just huge, blatant misunderstandings, such as that one. I've seen so many expressions of that idea. I mentioned yesterday that, I went to visit a school that was really proud to show me their inclusion unit. Oh, this is where we do the best inclusion. Come and have a look. Yeah. And basically, they put all the children who have some kind of like needs, they put them in the corner over there, and that's where they do their inclusion, which of course actually is the opposite of inclusion. That's exclusion. I mean, it could be that they have some form of provision that they've invested in that has some worth and contribution in some way. But actually, the ultimate aim, I think, is to bring people together.
Yes. Yeah. Let me tell you what another school said when I was talking about belonging, which relates to what you were saying. This other school, they said like this: oh, yeah, belonging is really important. If we see signs that a student doesn't belong, that the student may signal loneliness or not working, or others may signal that the student doesn't belong with them, then we need to identify when these signals occur and what happens and in what situations it becomes evident. And then we start working with those situations.
Right.
So a completely different understanding of the word belonging. And I think, well, let me hear how you respond to their idea first before I start talking more.
Just before I do, I noticed the lights behind me are flickering. Now I should explain something. I'm in the east of England, on the coast with my family in a hotel. And although England does have good electricity and Wi-Fi all over, we seem to have found the pocket where electricity is unstable. And this morning there was an outage because it's heavy rains here at the moment. So if we have another electricity outage, Helena, the show is yours.
Okay. Good to know.
I mean, for me, this is, I'm slightly bored by definitions and theory. I'm really into practice. And yet I think that it would perhaps be helpful for us as a global, in a sort of global contribution. For example, you have people here from all over the world who are in this Zoom call right now, to try and sort of put down some very basic rules, 10 basic rules of inclusion. And so the idea being is that we can somehow contain it, that it doesn't fly off in crazy different directions and lead to crazy outcomes under the name of inclusion, right? So I think that might be worth exploring. The very idea of let's sit down and try and write a rule book sounds really boring to me, but maybe that's what we need to do.
Maybe we talked before about, 5 things that every teacher must know. But to me, these 2 different stories, how the 2 different schools approach the idea of belonging, shows, I think, the main issue that will make or break inclusion and the development of inclusion. I think the first school, even if they are very much about the well-being of the child, they are placing the responsibility of being able to include on the child. They are seeing the child and this child's problems as the issue. And the other school is taking the responsibility themselves, and they're not placing the problem within the child. And I think that's the main thing. And whenever I see, we're about to have an election here in Sweden, actually. So we're about to go to the polling stations. And I can say that I think we have 6 or 7 parties. And all these parties are coming up with ideas for how to create inclusive. They're not saying inclusive schools, because inclusion here in Sweden is now a bad word, because it means that teachers have to actually do a lot of the things that they shouldn't have to do. And that's, the idea behind this is that there's so many children with so many problems, either because they are immigrants or migrant learners, the problem is theirs. Or if they have a disability, we feel for them, but the problem is theirs. Or they're just disruptive and don't know how to behave. We need to do something about that, but the problem is theirs. So I think that's the main thing. Even if we are angry with the child, or if we are really nurturing, both aspects can actually put the problem within the child and with the child. And I think that that's always the thing that I react to mostly. And I can usually say that when people talk about inclusion, they are mainly talking about problems that the children have. Like conferences like this. I really like this type of conference, which is about inclusion. Whereas another conference that I was invited to and that I actually turned down is about ADHD and DLD. And even if that's really important, it's important to know the consequences of having ADHD in a school environment. It's still placing the problem with the child.
Yeah.
You agree with me?
Yesterday, I spent most of the time talking about the staff, and the idea that it's about the staff that need to evolve and change, and that will then lead to the change with the children. I must actually just comment on this, if I may, and I'm perhaps slightly narcissistic, so I kind of see it through my particular angle, but I want to bring together the 2 ideas of belonging as a sort of articulation of inclusion, and also as a verb. And I'd like to do it in the following way. Like yourself, I visited, hundreds of schools, and unlike yourself, in some ways, I'm as my wife said to me as I was embarking on the journey of giving talks and writing and visiting schools and things. She said, Daniel, you're so and bearing in mind we have a very good relationship, but just as a context, so she said, you know, you're so sort of fat and eccentric and weird. No one's going to take you seriously in education. And I must say that this is quite an important bit of background here, is that when visiting a school, I don't come across as threatening or as an authority at all. I'm almost like the opposite as authoritative. But what this does is it kind of, and I reflected on this in my PhD, it really creates a space for schools to feel safe. Where schools are very hierarchical organizations with leadership hierarchy, and actually that isn't really necessary in the 21st century. That's a very ye olde idea, but it is what it is. And, you know, some structures, I mean, it's based on an army structure. You know, there are sort of officers and whatever. But it's just an army sort of structure that seems to be imposed on the school thing. But more than that, there's quite a lot of fear and uncomfortable feelings within staff about outsiders coming in and making judgments. There's also fear of the stress of things, sometimes from parents, sometimes from other staff, or fear like or stress about the workload. And the word inclusion, as you pointed out, from Sweden, for example, it seems to imply yet more work for teachers. And so the backdrop of it, is what I'm trying to say, is the things that I think that I have been privy to learn have been precisely because I'm sort of fat, weird, and eccentric. And in a way, that people have told me things that they may have been afraid to tell others. And there is this idea, the benefit of sort of creating an environment for school leaders to feel completely safe. And I think that from my experience of creating that environment is really the start of a revolutionary journey towards creating a whole organization of inclusionness and belongingness and safety. So perhaps the journey is about starting with a sense of safety and a lack of judgment, which in a school is quite tough.
It is quite tough, and it's not only within the school or between schools, it's at national levels as well. And I think the UK and Sweden have a similar experience with this, that we rank schools, and we have Ofsted, the inspections for schools. And I spoke with a principal just yesterday, and she said that it's so hard because the inspections are all about the hard facts, you know. How many accommodations are you doing? How many lesson plans can you modify? It's very quantitative, and we're after the quality, something soft, something perhaps not so tangible, but something that we can talk to teachers about. You know, how do you feed back to your students, for instance? And this principal was saying, well, how will I, you know, how can I quantify how my teachers feed back to their students? And I think this is something that I've learned over the past years, actually, or maybe the past 5 years, because I've worked as a Senko for many years, and I've been so angry with teachers. I've been so frustrated with colleagues who don't understand what I'm saying and who don't do what I tell them to do, you know. And I've learned the hard way, because I'm not as weird as you. I'm quite strict, you know. I've had to learn that I can't do that, that if I really want to promote inclusion, I need to do what you do. And I've read up on what we've talked about before, primary emotions that are often about guilt and shame. And it's so shameful to not be a good enough teacher.
Yeah.
There's no bar, you know, saying that, okay, up to here, you're not good enough. From here, you're good enough, you know.
Yeah.
So there's so much subjectivity. And when a teacher tells me, like last week, are you actually saying, he asked me, that I should be able to meet all the students, even the ones who disturb my lessons?
Right.
And just, 10 years back, I would say, yes, of course, what are you thinking? Absolutely. And how can you, talk about your students like that? I may not have been that, provocative, but today I've learned to say, well, I have no idea what your experience is. I just know that this is really challenging. And I understand that you're coming from a situation that was actually, over demanding for you. So let's talk about that. And I get so many better results. Before they would go, oh, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And now he
Right.
was like, yes, exactly. And he was so angry at me first. So yes, belonging starts and inclusion starts with the teachers.
Yes, I really like what you're saying, and the favorite my favorite course that I gave on the master's program that I used to run in inclusive educational leadership was about failure, and how failure is the birth of new ideas, and the power of, and I've been very open about my failure with students, and the fragility that we are as humans, and that we are not perfect, and that, I have this phrase, we're all bozos on the bus, we're just simple humans. I think there is a Christian idea of, we're all sinners, but we're frail and fragile, and it's a beautiful thing. Now, I don't know if you recall that when you and I embarked on writing the Global Inclusive Teaching Initiative, we explored the idea of creating some kind of mark for a school, to be able to say that they've attained a level of inclusion. Mm-hmm. And shall I tell you what I felt about it? I mean, again, this is a feeling, and because you and I are sort of skirting around the ideas of thinking about inclusion from a sort of emotional, intelligent perspective, rather than a series of specific activities necessarily. And that's what's slightly unusual about this conversation, I think. But what I feared was happening was, you would have yet another somebody with a clipboard come into the school and start looking and judging and assessing and pressurizing and stressing. And the teachers would feel, are we inclusive? Are we not inclusive? Are we there yet? Are we not there yet? Oh, good, we've made it, And the feeling I had about that, which is why I decided to cancel that thing, we decided not to do it, was it's like nurturing and growing a beautiful garden, and the joy of working in that garden, and then superimposing upon it a rigid structure which is so stressful that it takes all of the joy and the love out of it. And this is where I believe we've said two very contradictory things. On the one hand, we're saying inclusion, we're at the frontier, and people are sort of experimenting and growing. And the danger with that is that, well, people could go off in some crazy wrong directions. Maybe we need a set of rules. And now what I'm saying is the opposite, which is maybe when we impose those structures and rules, actually what we end up taking out of it is the love and the nurture that is really at the very heart of inclusion. So I may have lost you a bit there, but it's about the contradiction.
Yeah, I was just thinking at the same time. So yeah, it's a contradiction.
So do you want to make a set of rules for schools to be, or are you happy with this sort of almost it's sort of like encouraging nurture and encouraging listening and encouraging emotional intelligence and things like that? Is that what it is?
I'm not sure. You put me on the spot here, but I think it's a really interesting question to probe into, and we've gotten some comments too. There have been a lot of self-evaluation documents, like from AINSCO, where you can sort of evaluate how far you have come on the inclusion scale of different aspects. But self-evaluation is tricky because, at least here in Sweden, it's been proven that 90% of all drivers, of all people who drive a car in Sweden, think they are at the top 10% of being good drivers. And so, of course, that doesn't make sense. All the schools I talk to say we've come a long way. We've gotten to really good points. We've come very far. But then I go into the school and I see students sitting in separate classrooms, and they have these little groups, and they have a lot of students who don't even come to school, etc. So the question is, what does that mean, having come far? Is it one student less at home? Or so I think there are two things that I think. First of all, we need to talk about goal setting, because the inspections and all that are about goals. Have you reached the goals? And the goals are usually about grades. So they're hard goals, they're result goals. But there are different types of goals. We can also talk about effect goals. And that's what I like to talk about when I visit schools. What effects are you after? And that means that you have to go into that process. Okay, we want the effect of all the children being engaged from the start of the lesson. Okay. If that's the effect we want, then we need to talk about what activities, what methods, how are you going to greet them, etc. So we get into the nitty-gritty instead of talking about we need to have 10% more passing grades.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't place any responsibility on anyone. It just places stress on everyone.
Yeah.
So responsibility doesn't have to be bad. It's not accountability, but it's actually taking responsibility and knowing that I can actually do something about this. If I'm allowed to fail at it, if I'm allowed to try and practice. So yesterday I was with a group of teachers in a school, and they have a lot of problems. They have many, like Robert Cilia here, they have a lot of migrant learners, and they speak all these different languages, etc. And I realized that I won them over, the teachers, when I said, listen, this is something that we're all practicing. We're practicing being teachers. We're practicing teaching, and we're practicing meeting all the students. And they were like, yeah, I buy that.
I'm interested in this theme that we're having, which is about people being safe enough to try and also safe enough to fail. And linking this back to the idea that we're still at the vanguard, at the forefront of inclusion. We're right at the edge in some ways. We encounter lots of people who are innovating in the space, but part of what innovation is trying and failing. And we try this and we try that, and we may find a way. And linking back to what I said earlier, which is that and this is something which is quite difficult, which I find in the intersection between research and practice, is that just because something worked in one school doesn't mean for a second that it's going to work in another school.
No.
And, you know, there was a well-known organization in England that tried to produce some research around, tried to show different types of interventions. Some work better than others. And my feeling was that actually some interventions really very often are as good as the people who are doing them, who are delivering them.
Yeah.
And more importantly, you know, just as I like doing certain things and I don't like doing others, I feel better at certain things and better at others, and I'm sure you do as well, Helena. So probably we'd be better at the things that we like doing. And so maybe it's actually more of a reflection on the people rather than the interventions. And this is where I think we keep coming back to this idea of people and feeling safe, and really to do with staff. You and I talk a lot about staff rather than children. Yeah. The conversation for the last 30, 40 years is all about the children.
Yeah.
And what you and I pretty much always talk about is developing the staff. And if we get the staff to a certain place, but what we're saying is that developing staff requires an understanding that they are people with fears, anxieties, stresses, and that just bombarding your way in there and saying you have to do this and you have to do that is really almost like the opposite of developing real inclusive spirit.
Because if we truly understand, I think this is about cognition as well, knowing how we learn, and that stress is the biggest obstacle to learning. And that's true for the children, the learners, but also for the adults, obviously. So I think, you know, there's another contradiction that I just thought about. If we say that inclusion is a verb, then we shouldn't understand it as something that we just do. Like, I tell you, Daniel, to do this in your classroom to achieve inclusion, because that's not going to work, because you're a different leader than I am, probably.
Right.
So inclusion is a verb in the sense that we need to follow up all the time. And I think that schools that really make it, they are the schools that follow up. They don't just, I get worried sometimes when teachers who have read my book say, I've tried this that you wrote about. And so I'm really happy now because this means that I'm doing the design that you're talking about. And I'm like, well, that's not really, the design is about, you know, getting all the jigsaw pieces together, not just doing something. So I think it's the follow-up that we need to strengthen. And to follow up, you need to have courage, and you need to be able to critically reflect on what you have been doing and be prepared to discover that it really didn't have those effects that we thought.
Right. Now, my research guide and my knowledge bank, who is Vivian Gioris in Hungary, and she's over here, she's got a video on, just to embarrass her for a second. She would say that she would encourage me to say, let's talk about communities of belonging. And what I'm interpreting, putting you on the spot here, Vivian, you don't have to say anything if you don't want, but what I'm encouraging, that an example of what that might mean is this very conversation is a demonstration of what a community of belonging might mean. Instead of demonstrating what the PowerPoint that we might have arranged at the end and say this is the outcome, rather what we've done is we've demonstrated the value of international cooperation, dialogue, openness to listening and change, and that this is precisely what community of belonging is about. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I am now telling you that you have to do X, Y, and Z, and therefore you're inclusive. Or you say to me, but Daniel, if you do A, B, and C, then you're inclusive. It's not about that, but rather it's a process, and that involves being human with each other, listening, growing together, which is why yesterday I said I really hope that this conversation is a start, not the end product. And I'm just looking to Vivian over there. Do I get a nod? Like, that's okay? Have I said communities of belonging okay? Have I got good marks? Did I get a B? A grade B at least?
And reassurance is an important part, of course, but it's also something that we can be addicted to, obviously. So I think a culture of belonging is also fostering autonomy. You know, being able to make those decisions and stand for them, and then agreeing, you know, it didn't work. I thought it would. I think that failing is a really important thing in learning, because if you fail, that's actually a good thing, because that means that you've had an intention of something. And if that intention didn't work, then the failing is just, you know, feedback that, you know, you need to do this another way.
My preference, although if you think about this, is quite psychologically painful experience potentially for someone who's not up for it. But if somebody wanted to work in my organization, I would say to them, I would like to say to them, could you send me your failure CV? Meaning a CV. You know, I'm not sure if I'm using the same word that everyone uses internationally, but instead of your career history of just how amazing you are, send me a list of things that you failed at and how that impacted you. And not a sort of overly stupid, simple idea of what you failed at and what you learned, because you learn from everything. How about what you failed at and you tried again and then you just gave up? And because you've demonstrated to me that you're a human being and you can be open and honest.
Yeah.
And somehow the idea of the CV, that we represent ourselves with a sort of an avatar of ourselves, a representation, which is entirely false. It is, I find, a painful idea.
And you're moving into an area that I find more and more fascinating, and that's the area of school leaders walking the talk. I think we need to, but before we talked about how inclusion starts with the teachers. Actually, it doesn't. It starts with their bosses, the school leaders. And if school leaders are able to have staff meetings that mirror what we want teachers to do in the classroom, wow. And I've met very few school leaders who do this actually. They know what to say, they know what they want to see. They can't do it themselves. Sometimes because they haven't practiced, or sometimes because they haven't really understood, or they don't dare. But I think that this is something that we can work on, because a school that fosters belonging teaches children how to interact and cooperate. That's really important. And there are very many cooperative strategies to use in the classroom to foster this. And we need to see the same at all of these levels. So the school leaders' bosses, because we always have that hierarchy, they also need to do this. So what you were saying there, send me your failures. Then a person who does that may dare to do it with, the people that they are leading, for instance, learners. Okay, tell me what you failed at today. How de-dramatizing would that be? I mean, we're looking at teenagers today. I usually work with teenagers who are so tense, who are so worried, who are so in crisis of what identity they should be, which is impossible to answer, of course, because it's the same thing. We're all in a learning process and we should be able to be who we are. And what if those talks that we have, the development plans that we make with the students, were to focus on what didn't you learn? What did you fail at? And de-dramatize it. What do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, I firstly just want to acknowledge the comments. There's some brilliant comments, almost distracting.
Yes,
and what I definitely think that today things like Twitter and various different social media seem to really promoting this alienation idea, the way that we are divorcing ourselves from who we are and who we feel, and it promotes us sort of being distant from that. And for me, a lot of the inclusion stuff, especially in what I would describe as quite messy cases, which are complicated, painful, emotionally intense, really the solution to most of those are through the building of the relationships with the child, with the staff, with the parents, and realizing that we're all human beings, and somehow promoting that being. Now that can, to some people, sound a little bit wishy-washy, a little bit unclear. Well, just tell me what to do. And actually, this is one of the things which I find with children who are in a crisis point. Schools will react by saying, right, we're going to do these 80 things. I tell you what would be great is if they did one or two things, but they did it really consistently, and they did it with some heart and forgiveness.
And they followed up.
And they followed up, okay. And they also do it with the parents. I mean, I suggested that, one of the best things you can do with a child who is really struggling is to call home with some good news on a regular basis. And as opposed to the natural response, which feels to be like, is to criticize. So what does belonging look like? It looks like um, positive, nurturing relationships, which are built on the understanding that those evolve and change, and some days they're good and some days they're not so good, to do with failure of ourselves and of others around us, and that's okay, and we're humans. And there are some very practical skills as well, to be aware of how a child may feel, and the idea that if a child feels pretty good about themselves, they may learn pretty well. But if they feel pretty crappy about themselves, they're probably not going to learn that much.
They're going to put that distance between themselves and the demands placed on them.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're saying, that we're distancing us from who we are, but I think the main problem with that is also that we're placing the problems within. I must be faulty. I must have a problem. I must have a disability. I must, and it could be that I have a disability, but is that really the problem, or is the problem that I'm not accepted for that, or I'm not given the support system that I need for that? I think we need to talk more about staff being in a culture of belonging, and we need to make sure that families and parents who are so concerned for their children, we need to make them understand that schools have a support system for the leaders, for the teachers.
Yeah.
They are the ones who are, yeah.
Vivian, I met recently somebody who's the head of the International Parents Association, and they specialize in parents with of children with different challenges and needs. And I really feel like creating a safe dialogue between parents and school leaders, both of which can sometimes feel quite bruised. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the school leaders that I deal with, a lot of the school leaders I deal with may take about 80% of their time with the top 10 cases. And actually they feel quite stressed and bruised by their parental interactions. But a lot of parents who I speak with can feel quite bruised and stressed and challenged by the school. And actually, I think there needs to be a lot more sort of joined up thinking, rather than us go off into our own little corner over there and we'll come up with the solution and tell the parents what we've come up with. Actually, I think there is a sort of beautiful idea that that the school is an expression of our community, and I think you and I won't speak for you, Helena, but I saw a really good example of that in the Philippines with somebody that you and I have gotten to know, where they really see parents and school as quite fluid. I mean, obviously, school is school and home is home, but they see parents as people to learn in their and teach in their community too, and it's a real sort of community activity. And I guess that's where schools were. We were a village. We created an environment for children to feel safe and to grow, and then we institutionalized it. And I suppose partly what the direction of belonging is about deinstitutionalizing that a little bit and remembering that it's more about community and belonging and friendship and that sort of the soft stuff.
That the school is a place where everybody belongs, that, that belong to the school, they also belong. Belonging is, both formally and in the sense of the feeling of belonging. The parents belong there, of course, the children belong here. That's I like that idea, instead of, oh, it's going to be difficult for that child to have a place in this school because of how it's structured. Yeah, we have some work to do, I think. Time flies. I would really like to have people write down in the chat, what is your main takeaway from our discussion here? We weren't as inclusive as we can be, Daniel, but let's hear some voices. What's your main takeaway?
Should I tell you my main takeaway, Helena?
Yeah.
Just love chatting with you. You're amazing. I'm sure that's everyone's main takeaway. Helena's, yeah, I'm right about this.
And that you're...
Am I, Vivian? I'm right.
You're very... whenever we talk, I always go away feeling that I'm the best person in the world. So I think that's one of your strengths, that when you go out to the schools, you make people feel special and belonging. And I think that's a really great talent, but not only talent, it's something that you've practiced. That's good.
Thank you. Now let's have a look at this skills of discretion.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing. Tazita. It's confirmed. It's confirmed. It's official. Tazita, who's in Ethiopia, she knows.
Yeah. She knows what?
And I like Tazita. Tazita's
Helen
right.
is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tazita gets full marks for that.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Tazita. That's very sweet.
We judge her well.
Yeah. But I also think that Nabila is really has, you know, I can't speak English anymore. That parents want teacher solutions, the magical fairy dust. I think that's something that we all feel and are very stressed by. So we need to sit down with the parents and say, okay, we have a mutual belonging project here.
Yeah.
And we tend to be passionate about this, and yes, we are. We're very passionate about this, and so I'm glad that that came across. And I think that everyone here is very passionate about this issue. So I'm very happy to be able to be here.
Yeah. Well, I said yesterday, and I may reiterate this a few other times, is that Helena, it really feels right that we should next year we should go to the Caribbean to do this conference in person. Because the Caribbean being one of the most beautiful places in the world, it's only right. It's only right that we show up.
Absolutely.
Yes, I really like some of Zaina's comments have been brilliant. I don't know if you ever mentioned this to you, but I was once asked to speak at this sort of conference about to be on a panel about gang crime. You know, crime gangs and things like that.
That's all we're talking about here in Sweden right now.
But really? Well, I mean, I stood up and said, sorry, I don't know anything about gangs or crime, but is it possible to make our classrooms a place where a child feels like they belong more than in the gang? That the idea that the gang, they feel like they've got a career, they feel like they belong, they feel like they've got options.
Yeah. Can I just end this with a really horrible anecdote?
I love horrible anecdotes.
Yeah, it's a horrible anecdote, but it relates to what you were saying.
Yeah.
This is a suggestion, a serious suggestion from one of the larger parties here. And it's not the far right, but, you know, and they've said, in order to deal with the crime situation, we have a serious crime situation. Let's go out into all the areas where it's socioeconomically difficult for families and where there are lots of migrant learners, and test all the 4-year-olds for ADHD. Then we give them medicine and fairy dust, problem solved, because we medicate away ADHD, which is a problem for crime-related gang violence. And this is done in a civilized country where we're supposed to be well educated. And yes, I'm saying this is absolutely true. This is a true suggestion.
I thought you were saying, I thought this is where you were going with this, Helena, is that, Daniel, because you have ADHD, maybe you would actually be quite good at gang crime and I should reconsider it. I thought that's what you were saying. You
would look good on a motorcycle.
You are so kind. That's lovely.
I think
my true calling, says Tazita. Gang crime.
Wait, I'm so amazed. Sorry, not appalled. I'm amazed with all these comments. I hope that we can save the chat. And it's been really a learning experience for you and me too, Daniel, to get all these comments and thoughts along the way. So perhaps we should leave the floor to someone else.
I blame you entirely for this being a conversation. Thank you so much, Helena. A true pleasure as always.
Same. Thank you, Daniel.